BYD just shocked me. BYD Atto 3 has rust spots within 8 months of ownership and 1,100 miles. Here are the pictures. As you can see, the rust is where the bolts go. That does not look good. But what is even worse for BYD is that the electric Viking, who is a fan of BYD and has a BYD vehicle, although I think he sold it now, he says also that there is an issue. So let's see what he says. I know he owns BYD stock, so he will tell us the positive side of it, if there is a positive side of it.
So it's happened. Unfortunately, it's out of the bag. You've got to know it. BYD Atto 3 has some pretty significant rust problems.
It doesn't seem like there's going to be much defense here. It actually appears to be a serious problem.
Now, I've got to be honest with you. Realistically, right now, there has been a bad run of Chinese cars getting rust problems here in Australia.
Years ago, when you had a problem with a product, the first thing you would often look at is, where was this made? Oh, it was made in China. Throw out the whole thing. The whole thing is going to be filled and littered with problems. Now, the times have changed. Tesla does not have this sort of problem, and Tesla makes so many vehicles in China. This is just poor quality. And we have known about the relatively bad quality of BYD. Here you can see the number of complaints per 10,000 units sold. And this is a list where you do not want to be at the top. And yet, you see BYD, Volkswagen even, wow. BYD. To find Tesla, I need to not only go to the bottom, I need to go to the next page. And then at the very bottom of that second page, we will find the Tesla Model Y, and the Tesla Model 3 is right next to it. But rust in a vehicle that has 1,100 miles and is not even 1 year old, that is just next level poor quality.
Unfortunately, it looks as though rust could be a significant problem for the Atto 3.
I think from Sam's last few words, I picked up some disappointment, and I feel him.
BYD Atto 3. As you know, many of you know, I bought one of those. I sold it, recently sold it. There's a few reasons for selling it. But anyway, the Atto 3, I think it's a pretty good car. There's a few little things on it that I don't like. For the most part, though, it drives really quite nicely. It's a nice car. However, somebody was taking one apart recently. It was involved in a crash, so they were going to use all the parts from the car and convert their gasoline-powered car into an EV. And when they were taking it apart, they discovered some pretty significant rust issues. Now, the rust that was detected was in areas where, when you dip the car, those areas may not be covered by the anti-rust coating that a lot of companies apply to cars now. So basically what you can see in the images is in areas that were underneath other parts of metal, underneath bolts, etc., there's rust.
Years ago, when you would see rust on a car, if it's in a place like this where it does not affect the structure of a car, if it's not near the bolts of a car, it looks terrible, looks disgusting, but it doesn't really affect the car much at all. So, if you don't mind the look, maybe it's not that big of a deal. But with BYD here, the rust is where some of the bolts are. So if you apply pressure in these places, and if there is a bolt, naturally it's holding something, so you don't want that thing to move. But now, because the metal is rusted, and that metal, you can probably poke through it. That's how weak it is going to be, at least eventually. Maybe not yet, but it will be. So eventually, whatever these bolts were holding here, they are not going to be holding these things anymore.
Now, there's also unfortunately rust in other areas that's been seen by other people online, as in the wheel bay, in the door area. There's a few different people finding rust in different areas.
Things just keep getting worse for BYD. This seems to not be an isolated case.
We're talking about a car here that it's been out for less than 6 months now. The BYD distributor in New Zealand, he's a phenomenal guy. I love what he does. BYD, the brand, I mostly love what they do. As you guys know, I actually own BYD stock, but I've got to say it how it is. I am definitely disappointed.
Often then a competitor of Tesla is not doing well, I'm happy, but in this case, I'm not really. I mean, it's good for Tesla, but I'm not happy about this because this affects the safety of the vehicle as well. This is a safety hazard.
Now, how bad is the rust? Is it just surface rust? Is it really a big problem? Well, that's the problem. No one knows. In my opinion, how do you know how bad it is? There's no real way of knowing. It is technically surface rust. That is true.
That's right, but also it has not even been a year. That vehicle has 1,100 miles. What's going on? What do you think the resale value of that car is going to be in 3 years when there's a whole lot more rust in all of the other places of the car?
But it is true that surface rust can grow. And we don't know how fast it's going to grow. We don't know where else on the car it's going to grow. The cars haven't been sitting on the beach. They haven't been cars that have been owned by people who are right on the beach, which you would think maybe it would be fair to have rust like this in a car if you lived right on the beach, right?
Yup, salt exposure accelerates rust formation. But even then, this car is not even 1 year old. It only has 1,100 miles.
But these cars, as far as I can tell, that have been observed with this rust, haven't been owned by people who live on the beach. So this is an issue. It doesn't matter what you think, whether or not you think this is just surface rust or not. Well, there's no way of knowing just how bad this issue is. And from what I've seen, I don't think cars that are only 6 months old or even less than that, I don't think they should have this amount of rust, regardless. Even if you think this rust is not a problem and you don't know, but you don't know for sure, I really don't think that they should. So I did a quick Google search to try and discover whether or not this is an issue with BYD cars in China. Turns out it is and it isn't. In fact, BYD cars in China seem to have not had too many rust issues. There's a few that have turned into rust buckets. I found a couple, but I didn't find a whole lot. But rust, the thing is, it's the biggest enemy of an automobile.
Here is the original source of these pictures. It comes from a BYD EV Owners Australia Facebook group. And he says here that he thinks BYD gave these particular spots a paint treatment basically instead of an anti-rust treatment. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's filled with grammatical errors, but feel free to pause and give it a read. Certainly, though, this is not looking good for BYD at all.
Cars, of course, aren't designed to last forever. Sooner or later, they'll get rusted. And if not properly taken care of, this will happen quicker. If you live near the beach, for example, it'll happen quicker. If you live on roads where they're covered in salt, because that has to be done in your area, they'll rust quicker. Have you ever wondered how old rusted cars perform, though, in a crash test? Does surface rust potentially affect the crashworthiness of your car?
I am certain it would have a negative effect.
Well, it can. Researchers at a Swedish non-profit organization, an insurance company Folksam in Sweden, tested used cars that are just over a decade old to find out just how much age and rust affect used cars and whether or not the car's crashworthiness degrades over a moderate period of time. Unsurprisingly, there was deterioration in the crashworthiness of both cars in the safety tests.
You know, it doesn't really hurt to know for sure that that was true, just like it didn't really hurt when Deutsche Bank increased Tesla's price target to 250 from 220 and then specified that they indeed still maintained a buy rating.
And one of the worst cars for rust degradation or rust problems in China is the BYD F3. They rust badly, but that's an old car now. So whether or not the Atto 3 will go through the same issues, well, I'd say it's pretty unlikely. I'd say this is still a really good car, but I don't really know. I have to admit, surprised to see rust in a new car. I don't think what people are claiming is true. Now, some people are claiming this is normal in all cars. This is normal in, very, very common to see these kinds of rust issues in cars that are within 6 months old. No, it's not.
This article I found says that new cars should last over 7 years without rusting, give or take, depending on environment and maintenance. So no, this is not a normal thing. Sam is right about that. And this is the Tesla stock buying opportunity explained by Elon Musk. My name is Matt Post. Like and subscribe if you haven't yet. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.